nobody had internet in Hong Kong in the early 90s. And, internet was good to me. It was happening around the world. AOL was just beginning in the US, so I was like, I think this place needs internet. And so I set up one of the very first internet service providers in Hong Kong.
Really?
In 93, 94, called Hong Kong Online. And that was basically why I was, in Hong Kong. And one thing led to another, and then it became home base.
Welcome to the Encrypted podcast, your gateway to the future of technology and innovation, right here in the heart of Dubai's dynamic tech universe. I'm your host, Maria Vovchuk, and together with Dubai Blockchain Center, we are embarking on a journey that unravels the minds of tech visionaries through the digital frontiers that are shaping our world. Hello and welcome everyone to the Encrypted podcast. Today we're happy to have here Yat Siu, co-founder and executive chairman of Animoca Brands, a global leader in blockchain and gaming that has built an investment portfolio of over 450 blockchain companies worth over $5 billion. He also set up an Outblaze. It's an award-winning pioneer of multilingual white label web services. Yat has numerous accolades, including Global Leader of Tomorrow at the World Economic Forum. Most recently, he won the Young Entrepreneur Award from the Hong Kong Business Awards 2009 and the recognition as the one top Cointelegraph's 100 notable people in blockchain. Not everybody knows that, but Yat is also a classically trained musician and is a member of the advisory board of BAFTA, British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and is the director of the Asian Youth Orchestra. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yat, what else our audience should definitely know about you that maybe I still haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I guess maybe the only thing that could be relevant maybe to our discussion is I grew up in Vienna, in Austria. I was born there, and both my parents were musicians. And for those who may not remember, I'm a child of the 70s, so I'm definitely dating myself. And that was a time when there was still an Eastern and Western bloc of Europe. And my mom used to work at the Komische Oper, which was on the eastern side of Berlin. So I would visit her. And so for me, I saw the contrast between social democracies that were more capitalist and, of course, very communist countries at the time that were very, very, very communist, of course, in their way. And that actually gave me an impression about a little bit about some of the issues around the world, although I didn't really realize what impression it would give me until much later in life. Then after that, after I sold... after I worked for Atari, and then, they sent me over to the US. I experienced, basically capitalism at a pretty extreme level, being in the US in the 90s. And then I came to Hong Kong, a few years after, and that was capitalism on steroids, right? like Hong Kong being one of the freest markets in the world, and again, seeing the benefits of capitalism and how it basically drives entrepreneurship and innovation, but also some of the pitfalls in terms of how it can also create inequity, which I think a lot of the world is having today. And maybe the other side story that may be relevant is that I entered the whole sort of online space in the mid-'80s by uploading software I wrote, which is music composition software on a pre-internet service called CompuServe. And so some people, who are my generation might know, but most young people don't even know what CompuServe is. CompuServe is basically a bulletin board system that eventually connected to the internet. But in the 80s, there was really no internet as we know it today. And that's how I met people online who I never saw before in my life, and never have in many cases. And they would send me money for my software. That's how I got my job at Atari. That's how I basically built a kind of semi-virtual career without actually meeting anyone in person. And this was in the 80s. And CompuServe only had hundreds of thousands of customers back then, so it wasn't like that big. But it was sort of an inkling, a beginning of what today is mainstream, but really began, I would say, in the 80s in terms of what we now call the metaverse.
Yeah, by the way, I would tell that the way how you actually were looking for specifically where to build business, it's also really interesting. So as if you kind of had a feeling that you have to move first to the US and then to Hong Kong. Did you have, I don't know, was it a gut feeling that Hong Kong, let's say, was the place where I should build my next company and my next venture?
I'd like to say that, but no. I mean, my father's from Hong Kong. And I would say, what happened was that we built a business in the US that was acquired by SGI. This was in the 90s. early 90s. And SGI basically sent me out to Asia because back then, international business management was, you're Asian, go to Asia. I've never lived in Asia before. I grew up in Austria, right? I speak German. I didn't speak Japanese and Chinese.
If I'm not mistaken, German is your mother tongue.
It is my mother tongue. Yes, exactly. And then what happened was that the first place they posted me to was in Tokyo, which is good fun. But I have zero Japanese connections, and that was how it was in the 90s, right? People didn't want to go overseas, and then from that I went to Taipei, and then I came to Hong Kong. And really, it was just circumstance. And I think really, if you think about my life journey, while there was intentions, it was mostly circumstances and then me having to deal with the circumstances where I gained experiences and know-how that would eventually lead me to maybe perhaps some more specific intentions. But other than that, I came to Hong Kong really by accident. And because my father is from Hong Kong, I received permanent residency without even asking for it. And so I was like, okay, I don't need a visa to work here. And the other thing was that nobody had internet in Hong Kong in the early 90s. And, internet was good to me. It was happening around the world. AOL was just beginning in the US. So I was like, I think this place needs internet. And so I set up one of the very first internet service providers in Hong Kong.
Really?
In 93, 94, called Hong Kong Online. And that was basically why I was, in Hong Kong. And one thing led to another, and then it became home base. But it was very challenging because many people there didn't actually know anything about internet and actually didn't care about the internet. And so that was probably one of the more difficult experiences because it felt a little bit like selling fridges to Eskimos. They're like, why do I need this? And also, I was very young. I used to have long hair.
How old were you?
I was I was 20, 19 or 20, something like that. And so it was really difficult because...
So you set up internet?
In Hong Kong.
The first internet server in Hong Kong while you were 19 or 20?
Yes, exactly.
Amazing.
One of the very first ones.
Yeah.
And it was kind of an underground thing as well, right? It wasn't mainstream. We had private dial-up servers, and I remember the ISP that I set up had a 64K line. That was my access to the internet, and we shared that across our customers at the time. One thing I would say, if I look back, what the experience did tell me is I spent many years trying to teach people about the internet, something I took for granted. And I would say that experience taught me something about how to explain to people who don't understand what I do or why I believe in it in different terms and terminology, which you will notice that when I talk a lot about sort of, Web3, for instance, or gaming, I sometimes use parallels in other segments or other worlds. I think my previous experience in having to explain to people not from our industry has taught me a little bit how to communicate to people who don't know about the space. So I view Hong Kong and my experiences over the last decades really as training grounds, right? As sort of training wheels as to how I'm now able to perhaps more effectively communicate and how more effectively sort of grow the space.
Talking about gaming, when you mentioned, because Animoca Brands initially focused on developing mobile games. And then shifted to blockchain gaming and NFTs in 2018. Was it because you were interested in CryptoKitties at the time? This is what I read, and for me it was really interesting. And what I also liked about that you mentioned earlier, we didn't get into this market because of Bitcoin. We get into this market because of CryptoKitties?
That's right. So speaking of the story of circumstance, I think it's worth sharing. The reason why we got into mobile applications, which was in 2009, and eventually mobile games in late 2010, early 2011, had actually again to do with the fact that I was a young father. I had with a baby. I was back then carrying around these flashcards. And for those who may remember, people used to put out a flashcard, which is a cardboard piece. It would show the picture of an apple. It had the name Apple in the back, and you would say apple or banana or whatever. Really primitive if you think about it. And I asked the team to put it into a mobile app because I just said, look, I need something that I don't have to carry around hundreds of cards. And that application, which was really just something that was designed for myself, ended up having millions and millions of downloads in a very short period of time. And that's when we realized the power of the App Store, the new sort of paradigm of distribution, and essentially, what mobile smartphone applications could have as a potential, which led us into smartphone development. The reason I'm sharing this because it's very similar to our stories of how we discovered CryptoKitties. CryptoKitties was built in part by our studio in Vancouver called Fuel Powered. And they shared an office with Axiom Zen, That was a company that eventually spun out Dapper Labs. And they built this thing called CryptoKitties. And when it rolled out, as we all know, it broke Ethereum. Everyone was sort of talking about it in both good and bad terms. And again, we saw the potential. It was early, but we saw the potential of something. And what we saw with CryptoKitties was the first time being able to actually really own and store our digital culture. And from a gaming perspective, a way in which we could basically sort of maintain that, which is something that we weren't able to do before in the traditional gaming paradigms. Even though we would desire that, we want to keep our legacy, we want to be able to sort of own our stuff, even if we don't have to trade it, we just wanted to own that. And of course, I was aware of Bitcoin, to your point, and I knew, to some extent how it worked, having looked at the white paper and so on. But it didn't interest me as much because it was very financially oriented, and we didn't come from the world of finance. It wasn't something that spoke to us. So we just kind of left it to the finance guys to do. We're just like, oh, you're in finance, fine. You do crypto, you do Bitcoin. But it was only when NFTs came about that we actually began to click and say, wait a second, this could have a big impact in the world of gaming and then beyond. And that's kind of when we started developing a thesis around content being the platform and true digital property rights.
So by the way, when you said because you probably liked NFTs because from the creativity perspective, when you said about Bitcoin, it's more like for financial guys.
Yes.
Right now, with the rise of Bitcoin Ordinals.
Absolutely.
What's your take on Bitcoin Ordinals NFTs?
I am absolutely fascinated by it, and I think it's going to do really well. Most recently, by the way, speaking of ordinals and inscriptions, with one of our subsidiaries, Life Beyond Studios, they just recently raised $3.5 million, basically launching a game on Bitcoin based on
That's
based
news.
on ordinals. The news is only 2 days old, right?
Yeah.
So just to give you sort of that impression as to sort of what we think about it and why we think it's pretty cool. And now why is that so fascinating is that everything that you're seeing in the beginning, the start of this year with ordinals and inscription, is exactly what happened to CryptoKitties, right? It clogged the network. Some people got excited. It brought new people into Bitcoin in the same way that it brought new people into Ethereum back in 2017 and early 2018. But similarly, some of the people who were in the space before, CryptoKitties was not welcomed by open arms by many of the initial Ethereum guys. They were like, you're clogging the network. It's as bad. Just let us do what we need to do. Don't come in with this sort of like cat nonsense. And when ordinals came out, you had the same thing. You had people at Bitcoin community say, this is rubbish. This is clogging the network. It's making things expensive. We don't want this, right? So when we saw that pattern, we're like, wait, this is history repeating itself. There's something there. But that's not the only reason we went in there. The main thing that we thought about is that we described earlier Bitcoin as a store of value and NFTs as a store of digital culture. And actually now with ordinals, you can actually do this with Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself now has the ability to store digital culture. And culture is, in our perspective, the most sort of one of the most important economic indicators when you think about nation building, when you think about building an ecosystem. Because just think about in the physical world, what is it that we buy, generally speaking? What is that we invest in? And I would argue that we invest in predominantly in culture. Our clothes are culture, where we live is culture, traditions, Christmas, why do we buy presents? I mean, these are all forms of culture that we exist in. And when we think about money and transactions, yes, people invest and purchase that as well. But these are not typically things that we hold, right? Culture we hold, like rings and jewelry and fashion, because they mean something to our identity. But transactional items, which was, I guess, the more historical image of things like Bitcoin, these stores of value, they're investment products. Their purpose is to make money for you and then, or have a return. And then when they have the return, they move on, right? So you don't really invest. There's a cohort of people where money is culture, but for most people, money is a means to an end that tends to be cultural. And that's how we bring people on board. So when I saw that, I said, wait, this is where Bitcoin could become sort of an even bigger force potentially in this area. And I also think it's going to drive Bitcoin forward, not just for mass adoption, but also scaling technologies and solutions. And of course, getting more people interested in what is Bitcoin, because it's now more than just a store of value.
Dubai, home for innovations. At some point, Animoca Brands was also a startup. So do you believe that you keep up to like let's say investing into culture, not into investment products. Do you believe that this is like one of the secrets of success of Animoca Brands, that it is at the level that it is right now?
So I think, I guess the jury's still out. We're still building out as much as we can. But generally speaking, the philosophy, and I would say there's a North Star, right? And when we talk about digital property rights, which is really our North Star, everything we talk about is we want to advance digital property rights. The context is cultural and philosophical, which has an economic backdrop. And so that means that when we think about investing in projects, we think about projects that enhance digital property rights, as in NFTs. We think about it in the context of culture, because that's what we speak to as people. I would argue, for instance, that things like social media is entirely cultural, that gaming is entirely cultural, that music and film is entirely cultural. And that's actually how we speak to each other. So culture is deeply rooted. And because we're an organization that is sort of attuned to that, we focus on investing in those areas. That doesn't mean that we don't need core infrastructure, L1 and L2s, and these are all absolutely important. But the L1 and L2s to us are the roads. They provide the infrastructure. They're necessary, which is why we invested in them as well, to allow for the facilitation of these sort of roads of culture, as it were, right? I mean, if we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have, TVs, if we didn't have distribution mediums, then, how can we enjoy the movies that we watch? How can we listen to the music that we love? But we do it for the music, we do it for the content, we do it for the games. We don't do it because there's a highway there, right? The highway still has to serve a purpose. And so we sit on the application side of things. And that's really always been our culture, our focus.
You're also an early adopter of Open Metaverse. So right now, what do you believe what is the biggest misconception that people have about Open Metaverse?
So I think what the biggest misconception people have about Open Metaverse is just that it's, the Metaverse narrative. When I was giving my talk about the Open Metaverse at TED, I was surprised how many people thought that the Metaverse was Meta, as in Facebook.
Oh.
And precisely, same reaction. And in the bubble that we are in Web3, we all think it's a joke. Of course, how can Facebook represent the Metaverse? It's just, they have the name and they made it famous, but how can it be? But outside of our bubble, which is still fairly small, most of the people associate with that, which is why when the Metaverse is apparently failing from their perspective, they see it because Facebook's Metaverse is failing, and that's why they think the whole Metaverse idea is failing. They don't have a distinguishing difference between Metaverse and Open Metaverse. They just put it all together, which is one of the reasons why we have this misconception. And the misconception is that the Metaverse is VR and AR, that basically it's these devices, which in itself has been around for a while. To us, what the Open Metaverse really means is digital property rights. That is the foundation of the Open Metaverse. And so in that sense, you can think of the Open Metaverse more precisely as a kind of political, socioeconomic movement, rather than as a technology, right? Which I think, if you think again, when we use the internet or when we play games, yes, that's the applications that we play, but actually when we do what we do, it is about a human interaction. It is about a culture. It is about a movement of sorts. When people play Roblox or people play Minecraft, one can argue it's entertainment. But when people spend the kind of time that they do on these games and make the connections and create the relationships, they're actually engaged in a form of gamer culture, right? They have different ways of thinking resulting from these interactions. And so actually, to us, gaming in itself is a movement as well, right? So the Open Metaverse is a movement centered around digital property rights, true digital property rights, which from within will create basically these foundations of these new economies and these new countries that are being built up. I liken it very much to the way we think of nation building. The countries that have a respect for property rights are the countries that also endorse and sort of embrace capitalism. And then in order to do that, they have political systems that support around it. And that basically is the foundation of a nation or of a country or a society, for that matter of fact. That is what the Open Metaverse means to us in the same way.
By the way, I really like how you also see the Metaverse as like building new economy. And there is Mochaverse by Animoca Brands. So I wanted as well, in this case, so you would share with our audience, what is Mochaverse?
So Mochaverse is a way in which we've been trying to sort of unify, essentially, what we've built at Animoca Brands and allow other people to share in those same network effects. So what is Animoca Brands? Animoca Brands has over 450 portfolio companies, as you mentioned. We have many subsidiaries, such as the Sandbox and sort of Phantom Galaxies as well. and Rev Racing and a whole set of companies there as well. And within the network that is Animoca Brands, we have over thousands and thousands of people working in Web3, and we have over millions and millions of users within those ecosystems. So how do we find a way where people outside and inside can leverage these network effects more better? In the traditional way of doing this in an investment portfolio, you have a portfolio manager, and they say, oh, this guy, that guy, and they put you together, or there's an event or something. It's very analog, right? Yeah. But actually, if you build a kind of token infrastructure around it and create essentially a sort of social network around that, you'd actually be able to integrate and connect these network effects much more deeply. And so we started doing this with the Mochaverse NFTs, and now basically with sort of the most recent sort of growth around Mochaverse, where we raised some money as well. We're basically building a kind of token infrastructure to help unify them together, with the goal that people who are not necessarily part of Animoca today can now enter the Mochaverse space, either by owning NFTs or owning some of the future tokens, and basically participating in the network, which is essentially, think of it as an Animoca reputation layer. If you are you are a member of Animoca, then you have the NFT or you have tokens. That's a way to give you status. That's a way basically to provide a way in which you can be certified. For instance, in the portfolio as well, there's a lot of companies out there saying, oh, Animoca invested in us. Really? Did they? Can it be proven? There's a lot of news out there because we're prolific investors, and because also often if we are said to be investing in a company, then sometimes it's easier for them to raise money. And we often get verification checks that say, did they really invest, or what's the background? Again, if you basically use a token infrastructure, you can actually verify the membership, and you can also get other people to stake into it as well to demonstrate essentially proof areas. And of course, the other thing that we've already started doing is we've essentially started to delegate our token reserves into the Mochaverse community for voting. So for instance, most recently with ApeCoin, and eventually we'll also do this with EDU and Open Campus and other token ecosystems, where we can do governance through the Mochaverse of our basically token reserves, which is very powerful because it allows people, by holding Mochaverse, to be able to sort of have a say in these other very large DAOs, which is another area that we really believe in. We think DAOs are going to be the future of organizations, and we want Mochaverse to basically be kind of like a DAO of DAOs. So be sort of a way in which you can sort of govern and understand about the democratic principles of DAOs and basically evolve from there. So it's a work in progress, obviously, but Mochaverse we think is one of our most important projects for Animoca to basically help continue to build the Web3 space. And of course, there's Mocha ID as well, which allows basically people to have a decentralized identity as a soul-bound token to certify basically your identity in a manner that can scale. Because one of the problems right now is that when we think about the identity solutions, if you log in with Google or Facebook, these identity solutions, you give the data to the platform, and you really only have the benefit of a centralized login, and you don't actually benefit from all the data that might be generated from that, which basically decentralized ID will solve as well, and verify. For instance, in our industry, as you know, we have to often do KYC. But if you have this decentralized identity certified by Mocha, then you don't have to re-KYC every time. If you're a Mochaverse user, then you can basically maybe enter whitelists or enter programs or purchase stuff in a pre-certified manner.
When you actually said that, when you mentioned that you are doing DD as every company is doing, so what are the typical due diligence processes that Animoca Brands is doing on every potential investment?
Well, DD starts in multiple phases, right? There is a pre sort of investment process, and then there's a sort of actual investment process when it's being considered. And the pre one, obviously, entrepreneur interviews, looking at background checks, basically looking at
I was really curious, how are you doing background checks? That's really exciting.
Well, the background checks at the moment aren't super efficient in the sense that when someone's looking at it, then you basically ask other people in the network, what do you think of this company? What's the background? Have you heard of them? And often, many of these things can be discovered because Web3 isn't that big, right? Meaning that there's someone who'll know someone who'll know someone, right? So that's obviously one mechanism. And also very often when someone makes an investment and they know that we're looking at the deal, we also get a lot of people coming to us and saying, what do you think of this company? What do you think of this company? And so we share notes, for instance. But again, that's not the most efficient system in the world. That's why actually, when we think about Mochaverse, is there a way in which we can crowdsource some of that intelligence? Eventually, at some point, people should be able to give us sort of community-based information around this type of stuff.
Amazing. Are there any specific criteria or so-called KPIs that weigh heavily in your decision-making process?
Well, the most important criteria that we look at relates essentially to the qualities of the founder. Meaning that especially when it's a seed or pre-series A, pre-revenue type company, you can't judge it based on performance because the performance is impossible to measure. So obviously there's a macro factor. Do we believe in the market? Do we believe in the segment? Do we think we understand it? That's the other thing. We may not invest in something because we don't understand how we can help you. Right? Even if you want us as an investor and it could be the most amazing deal ever, we may not know how to help you. And also we may not know how to properly assess it. So we're not going to do it. But if we think we can help you, if we have an idea of how we can support you, then we may invest you. Or there's people in our portfolio that can do that. So we look for really two things from a macro, and then I'll talk about the founder qualities. We look for projects that either grow the NFT space, mass adoption, or provide more network effects as a utility for NFTs, generally speaking. That's why L1, L2s, even DeFi elements can fit into the thesis because they fulfill that criteria. And in terms of the founders, it's really important for us that, outside of the usual thing, they should be driven and passionate and purposeful and all that kind of stuff. We look for founders that understand the spirit of Web3. This is very difficult sometimes because we think the spirit of Web3 is about the shared network effect, meaning that you recognize that when you're building in Web3, you're creating a stakeholder community and you're sharing value to receive more value, which is not typical in Web2. In Web2, it's zero sum. You're basically trying to control the value. You're trying to monopolize this. And a lot of founders, especially during the bull run, looked at the Web3 community and said, wow, people are paying so much money for stuff. You can have potential value, so much value in tokens in an accelerated fashion. But they didn't understand sort of how to share that value with the community. They were just thinking about how to monopolize that value. So those would be founders we wouldn't want. Versus we'd look for founders who think about it sort of more in terms of how value is shared to grow the network and to build these network effects.
Encrypted is your exclusive ticket to the epicenter of technological innovations in the MENA region. When we are talking right now about the current so-called prolonged bear market, does it influence your decision about making new investments? And are you right now much more careful with the companies that you're choosing to join Animoca Brands portfolio?
So first, it's only natural in a bear market that one is more cautious. But we've made dozens of investments this year in the bear market. And I think there were some recent studies, I think whether this was at Masari or maybe even CoinDesk or whichever, that basically measured the amount of companies people have invested in. And we consistently rank as one of the top and most active investors in Web3, even in this bear market. I would argue that investing in the bear market is actually the best strategy. If you think about when we made the investments that we were known for, whether it's OpenSea, SkyMavis, which is Axie Infinity, the acquisition of Sandbox, even Decentraland, Wax, Dapper Labs, and a whole host of those companies. We made those investments in 2018, 2019. Bitcoin was around $3,000. Ethereum hovered around 100 or even less, right? I mean, that was a real bear market. If this is a bear market, then that was a winter. No, that was an ice age, actually. The returns we had from those were substantial because you can always tell for people who are building in a bear market that they're really actually dedicated towards it. Because if you want to make money, you can make money in much easier ways than building in a bear market. You have to have a belief in that. So we think there's better deals. It also means, though, that even though there's maybe more net deals that people want to put money in, the quality of the deals are higher. And so even if we could deploy more capital, actually there isn't that many more deals that are worth deploying into because of the market dynamics out there. And so I think there is a little bit of these both effects that has given it a sort of lower, generally speaking, not just us, sort of lower investment sort of, I guess, cadence relative to say, the bull years, which, is not surprising.
Understood. These are mostly our gaming projects, right? Gaming
startups. No. I mean, we do stuff in education.
No.
Yeah.
What I'm saying about the recent portfolios, obviously most of them are Metaverse projects or like with the inclining to gaming Metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, many of them are. We've done over 140 gaming investments in Web3. Yeah.
Recently, yeah?
Recently, I would say still half of them are gaming. So yes, it is obviously a big part of the thesis because we think of it as mass adoption. And we think of it very similar to the evolution of mobile games back in 2011, 2012. And so, investing broadly in the space, I think is a good thing. But it's not limited to that.
So right now, if we analyze also, there are a lot of metaverses focused on retail users, but they're also like built specifically more for enterprises like B2B metaverses. From your perspective, what do you believe, which metaverse from this perspective has more potential in your opinion?
In our view, it has to have a consumer outcome. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't build a B2B metaverse that serves consumers.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a service provider that might say, hey, I'm going to help you build a metaverse. And that metaverse is actually a B2B2C. So it still has a consumer output. A metaverse built entirely for enterprise to enterprise, we think the market's too small at the moment. I understand that for blockchain-based enterprise solutions, there's a market for that. But for metaverse, I think it's going to be pretty challenging at the moment. So it has to have a consumer output. But I also think, and the reason why we think of this as based on our gaming lens, is that gaming has that potential to absolutely sort of grow exponentially based on user adoption when people like a game. And that may have nothing to do whether it's on blockchain or not. It has everything to do with whether the community catches on to it for cultural reasons, for fun reasons, for all sorts of other reasons. If you look at the growth in mobile games, for instance, many of the games that have launched and become successful are surprises. Everyone didn't, like Flappy Bird or Angry Birds, for instance. These are things that, or even Mafia Wars. These are games that people would not normally look at and say, that's a great game, it's going to do well. Because, games have actually in some ways a meme-like quality as well, right? And of course now we've evolved to having much more advanced games, which I think is also what's happening in Web3. And even these advanced games, some of them become really, really big hits and drive a lot of users and adoption. So that's basically one of the main reasons that we're sort of focusing on the gaming side of things, because when you think about mass adoption, the chance of bringing on hundreds of millions of new users in a hurry will come from successful games in Web3, many of them that have been invested in 2021 and 2022. And it takes several years to make a good game, which means they're all just about to come out in the next 12 to 18 months. And we think, those are going to basically sort of be game changers in Web3.
You also wrote a really interesting op-ed for Forecast News that I read, and where you mentioned that NFTs will drive Web3 adoption and become central to the new digital economy. So when the NFT hype started, it really helped to make a living for a lot of artists, traders, content creators. But right now, the recent one of the reports that I read, it claims that 95% of NFTs are worthless. Do you expect the comeback of NFTs, like the wave 2, as they call it?
So first of all, comeback of NFTs, absolutely. But
new hype.
But I don't even think of it as a hype. I just think of it as something that's fundamental. Meaning that many of the NFTs that were issued in the past were not worth what they were sold for in terms of the speculative market. Meaning that, remember, many of the NFT sales were only selling NFTs for $100 or $200 or $50 or something low. There was a speculative element inside the early days that basically provided sort of, I guess, an increase in pricing. But actually, that wasn't determined by the game company. That was determined by end users who basically just traded and speculated on them and made a different kind of market that was sort of disconnected from maybe reality at that moment in time. NFTs still sell. If you think about it, at the end of the year, there's still going to be billions and billions of dollars sold in NFTs, right? At the end of the day for this year, probably $10 to $15 billion. That is not a bad sum at all, right? When you consider that this industry had zero revenue, maybe some 3 to 4 years ago, right? So from a growth curve standpoint, it's a meaningful business. Musicians still make more money if they sell NFTs than they make on Spotify.
Oh, yeah, that is true.
Yeah, and so it's a relative question, right? It's like maybe they didn't make as much money as they made in the bull year, sure, but they still make more money than they do in Web 2. The same is true for Web 3 gaming. If I'm playing a Web 2 game, my ARPU, my average revenue per user, is, for most companies, cents, 10 cents, 5 cents, 20 cents. If you're a really good game, you make $10, $20, whatever. But in Web3, a user is worth way more than that. Right? So again, it's all a matter of perspective. If you compare the peak, you can also say, well, Bitcoin was $60,000 and now look, it's only $29,000. It's all relative, right? So I think, again...
But there was a time when it was $3.
Exactly. So you have to look at it from, I think, the longer lens perspective to see where it's headed. So to me, while there are bumps on the road, it's like economic development. When you think, for instance, like a favorite example I like to put is South Korea. Most people don't remember that 3 to 4 decades ago, South Korea's economy was smaller than North Korea. Right? And today it's the 12th or 13th biggest GDP in the world, entirely built on cultural capital, and also because they embraced democracy, capitalism, and digital and physical property rights. And that framework basically helped build them into the country and I guess an economic powerhouse in what it is today. And but we had Asian economic crisis, we had financial crisis, we had all these things that happened in between while sort of Korea was growing, that when you just look at it from that year, appeared devastating. But when you look at it from the lens of the last 5 to 10 years, actually is pretty much a very healthy growth curve. So again, we're not sort of too concerned around the so-called state of NFTs. And you also see innovation in the areas of NFTs. For instance, how are we using this technology in this manner? For instance, NFTs were typically used a lot for membership services. Most recently, when you look at something, say, like FriendTech, right, which, with SocialFi, what are keys? Keys are actually a kind of NFT, right? I mean, they're fungible in the way that they're being sold, but its service and its practice function like NFTs, for instance. So I wouldn't say that they are separated. They kind of are integrated with it. And I fully expect that the new social networks in Web3 are going to be implementing and supporting and using NFTs in all sorts of interesting and fun ways.
By the way, what's your take? Right now, there are more discussions on so-called real-world asset tokens. What's your take on that? RWA.
Yes. So first, I would say that real-world tokenization is a very important segment, but it has been a topic really for many years.
Yes, I remember since 2017, the first ideas was, but these were used to be at that time after the ICO boom would be potentially security token offerings.
Correct.
Right now, there are more talks about RWA tokens.
Yes. Well, even those, so the one biggest issue that is always the case when you talk about sort of bridging essentially the physical to digital is the oracle, right? And the proof of that.
Oh, yes.
And that basically is, while it will be solved and, trust systems will be built around that, from our perspective, is harder for an initial kind of mass adoption because we focus on where there's already 3 billion people, which is gamers, and that are already spending over $100 billion in virtual goods, that could be NFTs. So while we agree that physical items are important, or basically real-world tokenization is an important onboarding mechanism, there is one that's right in front of us, which is the fact that 99% of the world hasn't even tokenized their virtual goods. So why don't we start there? Because that's actually much easier, and you don't have to have the same kind of oracle that you would need for physical world assets. Again, we're not saying it's not a good thing. We very much support it. But we just think that it's easier to go from digital to digital than to go from physical to digital.
That's true. Animoca Brands has also set up its presence in the UAE, and you're actively exploring the region. So can you say that the Middle East right now is the major focus for Animoca Brands?
It's definitely a core focus. We also focused on Japan. We also focused in South America and Asia, Hong Kong. Actually, we're focused in many markets, right?
Yeah.
But
on the whole world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe the US a little less so, just for obvious reasons. But when we think about this region, UAE is absolutely focal point. But the other one is Saudi, and that's because of gaming. And Saudi has expressed lots of interest in Web3, blockchain, and I think you'll hear probably some interesting announcement and news from us in that region as well. We announced a partnership with STC, for instance, and also with Mango Holdings. We've been fairly active in Saudi, for instance, over the last really 9 months, even making investments. For instance, the very first NFT marketplace in Saudi called Nukta, we made an investment there to basically help sort of grow its profile and really grow the Web3 narrative in the region.
But also you're actually expanding in Dubai, right?
Yes, I'm in Dubai right now, yes.
Yeah. And what's your take on UAE?
So UAE is fascinating. I was at Rakdao as well. You can see that they're really sort of growing that. And Dubai has been leading the way in terms of showing people what's possible when you have a more open and welcoming sort of, I guess, policy frame, what VARA has, for instance, demonstrated. And of course, Abu Dhabi as well has been very active in gaming and also really active also in the Web3 space. When you think of what Dubai has done, you can see all the talent that's coming here. I mean, Dubai is by all means one of the most international cities in the world and has probably one of the highest densities of people involved in Web3, in crypto, blockchain, generally speaking. Why is that? Because they have a more welcoming regulatory framework around it, right? From sort of top to bottom. So I think they've demonstrated to the rest of the world what's possible. And which, by the way, I think to some degree, Dubai has been an inspiration for places like Hong Kong. Hong Kong has become very friendly to Web3. And I don't think, they may not officially state it, but I think they've looked at the effects in terms of the growth and the capital and the financing and, the value that's been generated in Dubai because they've been sort of so open to Web3 and crypto. And then you even look in the US. I mean, while the US might be is more sort of hostile to generally speaking, crypto, the one place that has been very welcoming, which is Miami in Florida, happens to also be the fastest growing economy in the US. So eventually people will look at this and say, wait, actually, politics aside, we want some of that growth because we know it's better for our economies. And how do we get to do that? So I think, again, places like Dubai serve as the global inspiration.
Thank you, Yat. Right now we're going to our rapid fire questions. Rapid fire questions. So Yat, right now we're going to our rapid fire questions. You just answer shortly for every question that I ask.
Okay.
So, and what excites you right now the most in terms of tech?
In terms of tech, particularly excited about sort of what NFTs can do for education with Open Campus. So very excited about how teachers can make more money with NFTs.
Your biggest failure and lesson to learn?
I don't think I have such a thing as a biggest failure because I think we fail all the time on a regular basis. I think the lesson really is how fast you get up.
What do you believe a real entrepreneur should have 5 qualities? Which are they? Which are those?
5 qualities, wow.
Name 5 qualities a real entrepreneur should have.
I think a real entrepreneur should have ideally a mission and purpose that's greater than their own. I think they have to obviously have a strong sense of purpose. They need to obviously have strong values, whatever those values are. Obviously they need to, I guess, truth and honesty are obviously, I guess, givens, but sometimes we have to, especially in our space, have to probably mandate that. And I think the other thing is I feel that strong entrepreneurs have to be very empathetic.
What would you never do while building a company?
Actually, this is a difficult question because I don't think there's such a thing as never do. Because I think entrepreneurs are also, speaking of the other question, people who tend to break rules. And so I don't think that there's a rule per se. I think we have to just be flexible on that. So I don't think there's something I could really say we would never do because never say never.
Okay. Finish the sentence. My business philosophy is?
My business philosophy is to make a positive impact in the world.
Amazing. Your biggest aim to achieve?
Biggest aim to achieve?
Yes. Your personal, perhaps, or like...
I don't think I have a biggest aim because I think...
Ultimate goal, as they call it as well?
No, because I think it's a journey.
Okay.
So that means whatever we build, there is no end goal. There's only a striving towards the bigger purpose and the bigger impact. We often speak about building with impact and purpose, but that purpose and that impact may always grow. If I set myself a goal, for instance, in my 20s, it would be a very small goal compared to where it is today. So I think there's no such thing as an ultimate goal, for me anyway. It is an ever-evolving, ever-changing, ever-growing goal.
The motto you live by?
Oh, live with impact and purpose.
Amazing. Describe a perfect day for you.
Actually, I think generally, the work that I do, I love. So I think it's a great day. If I could balance it between my family life, my personal life, it's ideal, but that never happens. So the perfect day to me is, I guess right now, doing what I do and helping make and shape the world a little bit.
If there were a movie about your life, how would you call it?
A movie?
Yes, maybe existing, or how would you call if there would be a movie about you?
If there would be a movie about me. I don't know. I've never thought about that.
Maybe you can create one.
Yeah, no.
In the Metaverse.
In the Metaverse, no.
Yeah, everybody can watch it.
I would maybe if it's a movie title, it would just be, I guess, something like, I guess, a life of impact or something is ideally how I'd like it to be remembered by.
Amazing. And Dubai for you is associated with?
The Metaverse.
Impressive. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So today our guest is Yat Siu, co-founder and executive chairman of Animoca Brands. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time. From the gleaming skyscrapers of Dubai to the innovation hubs of the Middle East and beyond, Encrypted brings you thought-provoking discussions, exclusive insights, and stories of innovation that will leave you inspired.